Tonight we are going to spend some time with one of the most well-known teachings in all of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths. They are four simple sayings the Buddha offered his students. They have been passed down through every generation since. They tell us why we suffer and how to be free of it. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Most of us carry, somewhere in us, a quiet sense that life is harder than it should be. Things change. We lose what we love. We grip what we cannot keep, and we push away what is already here. The Buddha looked at all of this very carefully. And what he found, he gathered into four small truths. Tonight we will hear these truths slowly, one at a time, with stories that help us understand these ideas. We will also follow the Buddha's own life, from his sheltered childhood to his awakening, and home again to this very moment. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism. You do not need to remember anything. Just relax and listen. So settle in wherever you are. Let your shoulders soften. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. 2,500 years ago in northern India, the Buddha rose at dawn from his place beneath a great tree. He had sat there through a long night. He had seen something during those quiet hours that he did not yet know how to share with anyone. So he walked. He walked for many weeks. The world had not changed, but he had. He carried four truths. The first he would speak that evening in the cool air of a quiet grove. The grove was called the Deer Park. 5 companions were waiting for him there, sitting on the grass beneath the trees. The light was soft. The hour was late. He sat down before them and began to teach. The first thing he spoke was not a method. It was not a prayer. It was a simple recognition. He said, "There is dukkha in this life. This is the first noble truth, and it is to be understood." The word he used, dukkha, is hard to carry into our language. Some translate it as suffering. Some translate it as pain. The older meaning is wider and softer than either. Dukkha is the sense that things do not quite settle. It is a quiet unease that runs underneath even our pleasant days. Every living being comes to know it. This is the first truth. Life carries dukkha within it. It is part of how living things move through time. The Buddha did not teach this to make his students sad. He taught it to set them free. Naming a thing is the first step toward making peace with it. A traveler who admits she is lost can finally ask for directions. A traveler who insists she knows the way will keep walking in circles. So, the first truth is the door. Once we step through it, the rest of the path opens. There is an old image that has been passed down for many centuries to help us understand this first truth. The image is of the seasons turning. Spring brings warmth and green shoots. The branches that looked bare in winter begin to soften. Summer brings the long days and the heavy leaves. Autumn brings the slow turning of the trees, the changing of the colors, the letting fall of what was once held on the branch. Winter brings the quiet ground and the rest of all things. No one calls autumn a failure of summer. No one calls winter a mistake. We understand that this is the way of seasons. Each one belongs. Each one will pass. Another will come. The first noble truth points to something like this in the life of every living being. Life has its weathers. Some are warm and some are cool. Some bring sweetness and some bring difficulty. They turn for everyone. They have always turned, and they will always turn. The body itself follows the weathers. There are mornings when it feels light, and mornings when it asks for more rest. There are seasons of strength and seasons of slow ease. The body is part of nature. It carries its own quiet seasons. The mind also has its weathers. Some days the thoughts move quickly. Other days they move slowly. The mood can be steady as still water, or it can shift like a sky, filling with clouds. The mind too is part of nature. It is not meant to be a single fixed thing. The heart has its weathers as well. There is a tenderness in this. The heart was made to respond, to soften, to brighten, to rest, to know fullness and to know quiet. The heart has its weather the way the sky has its weather, and this is how a heart loves. To recognize this is the first truth. It is a teaching that lets us rest, because we are no longer fighting against the weather of being alive. Let us explore a story from this ancient tradition. Long ago, in a quiet village, set among rice fields, there lived a young woman who had lost the small one she loved most in the world. Her grief was so deep that she could not yet accept what had happened. She wandered from house to house in the village, asking each neighbor if there was any medicine, any teaching, any word that might bring her small one back. The villagers loved her, and they were kind, but none of them had the medicine she sought. At last, an older man who had watched her for many days spoke to her gently. The Buddha himself has come to rest in the grove at the edge of our village. They say he understands sorrow. Perhaps he will help. So the young woman walked to the grove. The Buddha was sitting in the cool shade of a great tree. He looked up as she approached, and his eyes were kind. She told him her sorrow. She asked if he could help. He listened until she had finished. Then he said, "I can help you. But first you must do one small thing. Walk back into the village. Go from door to door. From each house, ask for one mustard seed. The seed must come from a household that has never known loss. Bring me a handful of such seeds, and I will help." She thanked him. She felt the first lift of hope she had felt in many days. She walked to the nearest house and knocked. An older woman opened the door and looked at her with great tenderness. "I have come to ask for a mustard seed," the young woman said. "Of course," said the older woman. "I will gladly give you one. We have plenty in the kitchen." "There is one condition," said the young woman. "The Buddha said it must come from a household that has never known loss." The older woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "I would give you 100 seeds, if I could. But this house has known loss. My husband left this world many winters ago. I think of him every evening when the lamps are lit." The young woman nodded. She thanked the older woman and walked to the next house. A man opened the door. He smiled when he saw her. "I have come to ask for a mustard seed from a household that has never known loss," she said. The man's smile softened. "Ah," he said, "I am sorry. My mother passed 3 summers ago. She is buried at the foot of the hill where she used to walk in the evenings. I cannot give you that seed." She thanked him and walked on. She went to the next door, and the next, and the next. At every house she heard a story. A grandfather who had grown old and tired and let go quietly in his sleep. A sister who had taken ill one winter. A small one who had not lived past their first season. A friend who had ridden away on a long journey and never returned. Every house in the village had known loss. Every single one. By the time she had walked the whole village, the light was beginning to soften toward evening. She sat down on a low wall at the edge of the road and looked out across the rice fields. The water in the paddies was still. The sky was beginning to fill with the soft gold of the late afternoon. And she understood. She had thought her sorrow was hers alone. She had thought no one else could possibly know what she carried. But every house in the village carried something. Every door she had knocked on opened to someone who had loved and who had let go. She was not alone. She had never been alone. The understanding did not take her sorrow away, but it changed the shape of it. The sorrow was no longer a sharp stone she carried by herself. It had become part of the great quiet thing that all human beings carry together, woven through every life since the beginning of time. She rose from the wall and walked slowly back to the grove. When she reached the Buddha, she sat down before him and said, "I could not find the seed." He nodded. "But I found something else," she said. He smiled gently. "Tell me, every house has known what I have known. Every single one. I am not the only one. I have never been the only one." The Buddha said, "This is the first truth of the path. The wheel turns for everyone. And when we see that it turns for everyone, the weight of it changes." She sat with him in the cool of the grove until the stars came out. Though her sorrow remained, it had become lighter because she had set down the part of it that was the belief that she was alone. In the old tellings, it is said that the young woman became one of the Buddha's earliest students. She lived the rest of her life with a quiet, steady joy that had room in it for what she had known and lost. The first truth had not closed her heart. It had opened it. This is what the first noble truth offers when it is allowed to settle. It offers relief. There is a quiet relief in knowing that the difficulties of this life are not a sign of personal failure. The body that grows tired has not failed you. The restless mind is doing what minds do. A heart that has known loss is no weaker than any other heart. This is the shape of being alive. The Buddha is recorded as having said to his students, both before and now, "I teach only this. There is dukkha, and there is the ending of dukkha. The first truth and the truths that follow belong to one another. The naming of the difficulty and the doorway out of it are part of one teaching. You cannot find the door if you have not first noticed the wall. There is something soft in this. The first truth is the beginning of the story. It is the place where the path opens." When the young woman in the village returned to her own home that night, she lit a small lamp by the window. She thought of all the lamps lit in all the windows of all the houses she had visited. Each one a small light. Each one shining over a household that had known its own sorrows and its own joys. Each one part of the great quiet company of all who have ever lived. She rested her hands on the table. She felt the weight of the day, and for the first time in many weeks, she breathed all the way down to the bottom of her breath. There is a small teaching from the Zen tradition that fits here. A student once came to an old master and asked, "Master, what is the heart of the path?" The master answered, "When hungry, eat. When tired, rest." The student frowned. "But everyone does that." The master shook his head slowly. No. Most eat while thinking of something else. Most rest while still carrying their work. To eat when eating, to rest when resting. This is the whole of the path. The first noble truth asks us to do something very close to this. It asks us to notice what is actually here. The body in its weather, the mind in its weather, the heart in its weather. Not the story we tell about it, not the wish that it were otherwise, just what is here. When difficulty is here, we let it be difficulty. We meet it without pretending it is something else. We let it be the weather it is. When ease is here, we let it be ease. We meet it without clinging or insisting it remain. We let it be the weather it is. This is the practice of the first truth. It is gentle. It is honest. It returns us to the simple fact of being alive. The practice that flows from this first truth is small. When something difficult arises in the body, you do not need to fix it right away. You can let it be what it is for a breath. You can say silently to yourself, "This too belongs." When something difficult arises in the mind, you do not need to push it away. You can let it pass the way a cloud passes overhead. You can say silently, "This too belongs." When something difficult arises in the heart, you do not need to carry it alone. You can remember the lamps lit in all the houses, in all the villages, across all the long centuries. You can say silently, "This too has been known." The seasons turn. The weathers move through. You belong to the turning. So does every other living being. There is a great quiet kindness in this recognition. It softens the heart toward oneself. It softens the heart toward others because you understand that they too are walking through their own weather, even when they carry it gracefully and quietly. The Dhammapada, one of the oldest collections of the Buddha's sayings, holds a line that points to this truth simply. All things change. When one sees this with wisdom, one walks the way of peace. The first truth is the first step on that way. Let us rest here for a few breaths. The body can soften a little further. There is nothing more that needs doing. When you are ready, we will continue together. Imagine a river. It moves through a wide valley, flowing steadily toward the sea. The water is clear. The current carries leaves, fish, the soft light from the sky. Sometimes the river hurries. Sometimes it slows. But it keeps moving. Movement is its nature. Off to one side of the river, there is a small pool. Long ago, a fallen branch slowed the water there, and the pool was cut off from the main current. Over the years, the water in the pool has grown still, then dark, then heavy. Nothing flows through it anymore. The river still moves. The pool stopped moving the day it stopped letting go. This is one of the oldest images in the Buddhist tradition for what we are sitting with tonight. The river is life as it actually moves. The pool is what happens inside us when we try to hold on. The Buddha taught 4 noble truths. The first is that life carries difficulty within it, the same way nature carries weather. The second truth, which we are exploring now, is more subtle. It says that most of our suffering does not come from the difficulty itself. It comes from our quiet, constant attempt to hold on, to push away, to make the river do something other than flow. The word the Buddha used for this was tanha. It is sometimes translated as craving, sometimes as thirst. It is the deep pull of the mind toward what we want and away from what we do not want. We want pleasant feelings to stay, unpleasant ones to go, the past to be different, and the future to be guaranteed. None of this is anyone's fault. It is what an untrained mind does. The mind reaches and pushes constantly, like a tired hand trying to hold water. The Buddha noticed something simple about this. The thirst itself is the source of most of our pain. The events of life come and go. We suffer when we try to grip them or refuse them. There is a teaching from very early in the Buddhist tradition that captures this so clearly that it has been carried through every century since. It is sometimes called the teaching of the two arrows. The Buddha said to his students one evening, "Imagine a person who is struck by an arrow. There is pain in this. The wound is real. The body feels it. Now imagine that same person, after being struck by the first arrow, picks up a second arrow and strikes themselves with it. The first arrow is the difficulty that life brings. The second arrow is what the mind adds. The story we tell about it. The blame. The resistance. The wishing it were otherwise. The turning of it over and over. Most people, the Buddha said, are struck by both arrows. The wise one feels only the first." The Buddha used this image because he wanted his students to see something they could not easily see on their own. The first arrow is unavoidable. Everyone who lives feels the first arrow. A loved one falls ill. Something we cared about does not work out. A word we did not deserve lands hard. A body grows tired with the years. These are first arrows. They come, sometimes gently, sometimes with great force. They are the difficulties of being alive. The second arrow is different. The second arrow is the one we shoot ourselves with after the first one has landed. It is the half hour we spend turning the conversation over in our head, finding new things to be hurt by. It is the long evening of rehearsing what we should have said. It is the silent argument we have with the day, the body, the past, the world. The first arrow lasted a moment. The second arrow lasts as long as we keep firing it. The second arrow is something we hand to ourselves. The second noble truth is the gentle recognition that we have been handing ourselves second arrows for most of our lives, and that we do not need to. Let us explore a story that has been passed down in the Zen tradition for many centuries. Long ago, two Zen monks were walking together along a path that wound through wooded hills. The older monk had been on the path for many years. The younger was still in his early days of training. They had spent the morning in silence. Their walk had been peaceful. In the afternoon, they came to a wide, slow river that crossed their road. There was no bridge. The water was high from spring rain. Standing at the edge of the river was a young woman in fine traveling clothes. She had clearly intended to cross, but the water was too deep for her, and she had been waiting for some time, unsure how to make the journey. She turned and looked at the two monks with quiet hope. The Zen tradition holds many rules. One of them, in those days, was that monks of this order did not touch women. The younger monk hesitated. He looked at his teacher. The older monk smiled at the woman, knelt down, and said gently, "Climb on my back. I will carry you across." The woman thanked him with great relief. She climbed onto his back. The older monk waded carefully into the river, found his footing in the cold current, and crossed slowly. When he reached the other side, he set her down. She bowed and thanked him. He bowed in return. She continued on her way. The two monks walked on in silence. They walked for an hour, then 2 hours, then 3. The younger monk was very quiet. His face had grown tight. He was thinking, and his thinking was getting heavier. At last, when the sun was beginning to lower toward the hills, the younger monk could no longer hold it in. He turned to his teacher and said, "Brother, you know our rule. We do not touch women. We do not even look at them directly. And yet you carried that woman across the river on your back. How could you do such a thing? How can you live with what you have done?" The older monk stopped walking. He turned and looked at the younger monk with kind eyes. "My friend," he said softly, "I put that woman down hours ago on the far bank of the river. Why are you still carrying her?" The younger monk stood in the road for a long moment. The afternoon was very quiet. He could hear the breeze moving through the trees. He could hear his own breath. He could hear how heavy he had been all afternoon, carrying a woman he had never even touched. He bowed slowly to his teacher. Something in him began to loosen. This is the second noble truth held inside one small story. The older monk had let go at the moment. Letting go was natural. The younger monk had kept carrying, and what he carried had grown heavier with each step. Most of us walk through our days like the younger monk. We set down very little. We carry what happened last week, what someone said years ago, our worries about tomorrow, the wish that something had gone differently. By evening, our shoulders are tired, and most of what we are tired from happened long ago. There is a quiet kindness in the older monk's question. Why are you still carrying her? It is not asked to shame the younger monk. It is asked gently, with a kind of warm humor. The older monk has been there himself. Most of us have been there. We are still there in some part of our lives right now. There is something we set down hours ago, or yesterday, or many years ago, that we are quietly still carrying without realizing it. The second noble truth points to this gently. Most of the weight we carry through our days does not actually belong to the day itself. The day passes. The river keeps moving. We are the ones still holding what we picked up earlier. This is why the Buddha spoke of grasping and resisting as the cause of suffering. Grasping is what the younger monk's mind did on its own. It picked up an event, held it tight, turned it over, kept it. Resisting is the same motion in reverse, pushing away what is already here, refusing to let it pass. Both grasping and resisting come from the same root. Underneath them is the feeling that we are a small, separate self that has to defend itself, organize the world, secure its pleasure. The small, separate self is itself part of the illusion. There is no hard fixed thing inside us that needs all this defending. There is awareness, breath, sensation, thought. There is life moving through. The separate self that has to grip everything is a kind of misunderstanding. When the gripping relaxes, the misunderstanding eases too, and something quieter is allowed to rest beneath everything. The Buddhist tradition is full of teachings on this point. One of the great Buddhist texts, called the Diamond Sutra, contains a single line that holds the heart of the second truth. It says simply, "Develop a mind that clings to nothing." Such a mind still feels. It still wants. It still cares. But it lets each experience come and go, like a river letting each fallen leaf travel through. There is feeling. There is wanting. There is no grip. When the grip relaxes, something quietly changes. The day stops weighing so much. We do not become cold or distant. We become lighter. The same things happen. We meet them with both hands open instead of one hand clenched. This is what the second noble truth is showing us. What hurts us is not the event, but the hand that refuses to open. It can be useful to notice the shape of the clinging when we are honest with ourselves. The second arrow comes in many forms. It can come as the wish that something had not happened. We turn the event over and over in the mind, looking for the place where we could have made it different. The event is over. The turning over is what hurts now. Or it can show up as a quiet grievance towards someone. We carry the small wound through the day, polishing it like a smooth stone in the pocket. The person continues their life. The stone we carry is ours alone. Sometimes it lives in the body, in an argument, with a tightness or a tiredness. There is a small wave of sensation. We push back against it. The wave was always going to pass. The pushing builds a wall around it that lasts much longer than the wave. Other times the clinging stretches across long horizons, in the wish for a different past, a different present, a different future. Each form is the same motion. The hand reaching out to grab the river and shape it. None of this is failure. It is what untrained minds do. The second truth is simply naming what is happening so we can begin to recognize it. In the Buddhist tradition, this recognition is itself the beginning of freedom. We do not have to fix the clinging. We only have to notice it. The noticing is the first softening. There is an old Zen image for this. A bird flying through the sky leaves no track. A fish swimming through clear water leaves no trail. The mind that is fully present moves through experience in the same way. It meets each moment. Then it lets the moment pass. The next moment is allowed to come without yesterday's weight pressing down on it. There is a simple line carried through many generations of Buddhist teaching. What you let go of, you do not lose. You only stop carrying it. The river that flows through the wide valley does not lose the leaves it carries. The leaves are still leaves. They have only stopped being a weight. They become a gentle motion in the water. When the older Zen monk set the woman down on the far bank, he did not lose her. He simply stopped carrying her. She continued her life. He continued his. The kindness of the moment remained. The weight did not. This is what the second noble truth offers when it is allowed to settle. This is not a call to let the pool find its way back into the current. The Buddha did not teach this to make us feel bad about how much we grasp. He taught it because he wanted us to see that grasping is something the mind does, not something the mind is. The mind underneath the grasping is already free. Awareness itself does not cling. It simply notices. When we notice ourselves grasping, the grasping has already begun to thin. The noticing comes from a wider place inside us. The wider place was here all along. It was simply hidden by all the holding. This is why the second noble truth is good news, gently told. The thing that has been making us tired all these years is something we can learn to recognize. And what can be recognized can begin to be released. The releasing does not have to happen all at once. The Buddhist path is not a leap. It is a slow softening, a long, patient unhanding. The hand that has been gripping for many years is allowed to open one finger at a time. Let us pause here for a few breaths. Notice how the body is resting. Notice that nothing more needs doing. When you are ready, we will continue together on the next part of the path. In the Zen tradition, there is a small image that has been carried for many centuries. A still pool on a clear night. The full moon overhead. The moon is reflected perfectly in the surface of the water. The moon never comes down. The water never reaches up. When the water is still, the moon is simply there. There is something quietly perfect in this. The water has not made an effort. The moon has not bestowed itself. There is no doing in the meeting at all, only stillness, and what the stillness reveals. This image points to something the Buddha named long ago in the third of his Four Noble Truths. The third truth is the most hopeful of the four. It says that the suffering most of us know so well can come to an end. Not by removing the events of life, not by escaping the body. The truth is gentler than that. When the grasping stops, the suffering stops. When the water of the mind grows still, what was always there becomes visible. The Buddha had walked away from his palace at the age of 29. He spent 6 years searching. He tried every teacher he could find. He tried every practice the ancient world knew. He grew thin and tired and was no closer to peace. Then he sat beneath a great tree one night, and during those long hours, something settled inside him. He saw that suffering had a cause, that the cause could end, and that the ending was available in this very life. He spent the rest of his years telling people about it. The third truth says, in its simplest form, that freedom is possible. The grip can loosen. The river inside us can begin to flow again. This does not mean that hard things stop happening. The weathers still come. The body still ages. People we love still come and go through our lives. The third truth is not a promise that life will become easy. In the Buddhist understanding, this is what freedom means. It is not escape from life. It is presence inside life, without grip. There is a famous moment from the early Buddhist tradition that captures this. A traveler came to the Buddha one morning as he was walking through a city. The traveler had been searching for many years. He was exhausted. He fell at the Buddha's feet and asked for the briefest teaching the Buddha could give him. He felt he did not have much time. The Buddha was a quiet, gentle man. He looked at the traveler with kind eyes. He said, "In what you see, let there be only the seeing. In what you hear, let there be only the hearing. In what you sense, let there be only the sensing. In what you know, let there be only the knowing." The traveler heard this, and something opened in him on the spot. He thanked the Buddha and walked away. He had received the whole teaching in 4 sentences. In Buddhist tradition, it is said that this traveler walked only a short distance before something even quieter happened. He sat down by the side of the road, his eyes wet, and he understood in his bones what the Buddha had pointed at. He had been seeking for many years. The seeking had been everything. And now, in the space of one short morning, the seeking had simply stopped. There was nothing more to find. The seeing was already happening. The hearing was already happening. The whole of life was already meeting itself, with no extra layer pressing down on top. He sat by the road for a long time. People walked past him. He did not notice. He was learning, all over again, how to be simply where he was. What did the Buddha mean? He was pointing at the very thing the second noble truth describes. When we see, we usually do not just see. We see, and then we judge, and compare, and wish it were different, and worry about what it means, and then we grasp or push away. Most of our suffering happens in those extra layers. When seeing is just seeing, the extra layers fall away. What remains is direct and quiet. The moon is reflected in still water. The water does not have to do anything to make the reflection happen. It only has to be still. Let us explore a story that has been told for many generations in the Zen tradition. It is set in the mountains of an old country in the East, in the days when teachers lived alone in small huts and spent their lives in simple practice. Long ago, a Zen hermit lived in a tiny hut on the side of a mountain. He had been a monk for many decades. By the time of this story, he owned almost nothing. His hut held one bowl, one cup, one thin sleeping mat, and one robe. He spent his days walking, writing simple verses, and watching the seasons pass over the valley below. He had everything he needed and nothing more. One night the hermit was returning home late after walking a long distance to visit a friend in the village below. The path up the mountain was quiet under the moonlight. As he came near his hut, he saw a soft light moving inside. Someone was there. The hermit slowed his steps. He came quietly to the door and looked in. A poor man was inside, holding a small lamp, looking around carefully. He was thin and his clothes were patched. He had clearly come hoping to find something he could take with him. But the hut held very little. There was no rice in the bowl. There were no coins anywhere. Old and worn, but it was warm. It was the only one the hermit had. The poor man stared at the robe. Then he stared at the hermit, who now stood in only his thin under tunic. The poor man did not know what to say. He bowed quickly, more than once, and slipped out of the hut into the night. The hermit watched him go down the mountain path. When the poor man was out of sight, the hermit sat down on the step of his hut and looked up at the sky. The moon was very full that night. It was floating bright and quiet above the mountain. The valley below was silver. The air was cool and clean. The hermit smiled. He said softly to himself, "Poor fellow. I wish I could have given him this beautiful moon." In the morning, when the hermit's friends came up the mountain to bring him rice, they found him sitting peacefully on the step. He had no robe. He had no bowl. He had not slept much. But his eyes were bright, and he looked more at peace than they had ever seen him. The friends sat with him for a while. They asked him what had happened. He told them quietly about the poor man in the night. They were upset on his behalf. They worried about the cold. They worried about who would replace the robe. The hermit just smiled. The robe was useful for many winters, he said. Now it is useful for someone else. I am glad it was here when he needed it. The friends went down the mountain shaking their heads. They could not understand how the hermit could be so peaceful about losing everything he owned. They did not yet understand that the hermit had not lost anything that morning. What he had needed all along had never been the robe. This is the third noble truth held inside one small story. The hermit had nothing to lose because he had set down the holding long before. The robe was a useful thing, and when he had it, he wore it. When someone else needed it, he gave it. The robe came and went. The hermit remained. His peace did not depend on the robe. This is what freedom looks like in the Buddhist understanding. It is not the absence of things. It is freedom from the grip on things. The hermit could be cold without being miserable. He could be alone without being lonely. He could lose what he loved without losing himself. Most of us have not gotten there. Most of us are still gripping. But the third truth says that what the hermit had is not far from any of us. It is closer than our skin. It is the part of us that is already free, that has always been free, that is simply hidden underneath all the gripping. When the gripping relaxes, the free part shows through. In another famous Buddhist teaching, the Buddha was once asked whether freedom is something far away or something near. He answered that it is near. He said that the trouble is we keep looking past it. We look for it in the future when we are wiser, or in the past when we were younger. We look for it on retreats and in books and in our great plans. Meanwhile, it is sitting quietly behind everything we already are. There is a single line from one of the oldest Zen teachers that points at this. He said, "Ordinary mind is the way." He did not mean the mind that is always running and grasping. He meant the mind underneath. The mind that knows what it is to walk and to eat and to breathe and to look up at the sky. The mind that is already here. He kept writing his simple verses. He kept noticing the moon. The shape of his life did not change much when he found his peace. What changed was that he was no longer trying to make life be something other than what it was. He met what came. He let go of what passed. This is what the third noble truth quietly offers. Not a different life. The same life, met with open hands. There is a famous saying that comes down to us from the Zen tradition. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The wood and the water do not change. The one who chops and carries is the one who has grown lighter. This is the heart of the third truth. We do not have to become someone else to be free. The very life we are already living can become the place where freedom rests, when the gripping inside us begins to soften. Most of us think that freedom must come at the end of a long road. We picture ourselves arriving somewhere. We picture a different version of ourselves, finally at peace. But the Buddhist tradition says, gently and many times, that the freedom is not at the end of the road. The freedom is in the walking. It is in how we hold what we are already doing. It is in the small kindness, the small attention, the small letting go, the small return to the breath. Each of these is a taste of the third truth. Each of these is the same freedom that the hermit knew in his hut and the Buddha knew under his tree. There is a small Zen verse that closes well here. It says, "The wild geese do not intend to leave their tracks in the pond. The water has no mind to receive their image. And yet, for a moment, the geese are perfectly reflected on the surface of the water. This is how a free mind moves through the world. It does not try to leave a mark. It does not try to hold what passes by. It simply meets what comes, the way still water meets the sky. When the geese fly on, the water lets the image go. There is no sorrow in this. There is no grasping. There is only the next moment, and the next, and the next, each one met fresh. The third noble truth says that this kind of mind is possible. It is not reserved for great teachers. It is not far away. It is what we already have, underneath all the holding, waiting quietly to be uncovered. The third truth is, in some quiet way, the most generous of all the truths. It It says that the freedom we have been seeking is not somewhere else. It is not in another life or another year. It is here. It has always been here. It is waiting in the body that is breathing now, in the mind that is listening now. The water needs only to grow still, and the moon, which never left, will reveal itself again. Let us rest here for a few breaths. The mind can soften. There is nothing further you need to reach for. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a moment in the Buddha's life that points to the heart of the fourth noble truth. He was sitting by a river, exhausted, after 6 years of extreme practice. He had tried every harsh discipline the ancient world knew. He had fasted until he could no longer stand. He had sat for days without moving. He had pushed his body to the edge of what it could bear. He was no closer to peace than when he had begun. That afternoon, as he sat in the shade of the trees, he heard the voices of 2 travelers passing by on a small boat. One was a music teacher. The other was his student. The teacher was speaking to the student about the strings of an instrument. "If you tighten the strings too much," the teacher said, "they will break and there will be no music. If you leave the strings too loose, they will not sing and there will be no music. The string must be tuned in the middle, not too tight, not too loose. Then there is music." The Buddha heard these simple words and something in him quieted. 6 years of striving had taught him what the music teacher knew without thinking. The path to freedom is not found in extremes. It is found in the middle. The Buddha sat for a long time after the boat had drifted past. The teacher and his student were already far down the river. They did not know that the man on the bank had just heard something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. They were simply 2 people on a boat talking about how to make music. But for the man on the bank, something had shifted. The path was not in extremes. The path was in the middle. The tuning of the string, the willingness to be neither too tight nor too loose, the simple, gentle balance that allowed music to happen. This is the heart of the fourth noble truth. The Buddha taught 4 noble truths. The first is that life carries difficulty within it. The second is that grasping turns ordinary difficulty into long suffering. The third is that the grasping can be released, and what shines through is freedom. The fourth is the gentle one. It tells us how. The Buddha called it the Eightfold Path. The name can sound grand, but the teaching is small. The path is something an ordinary person can walk in an ordinary day. It is made of 8 gentle qualities that, over time, come into balance and form a life of peace. The Buddha discovered this path by walking off the extreme. Most of us begin in some version of the extreme too. Either we work too hard at being good, or we give up trying. Either we tighten ourselves until we break, or we loosen ourselves until there is no music left in our lives. The fourth truth reminds us that the way is neither. In the Buddhist tradition, this is called the middle way. Let us explore the canonical story that the Buddha himself used to teach this. Long ago, there was a young monk who had been a famous musician before he gave up his old life to follow the Buddha. He was talented and earnest. When he joined the order, he threw himself into practice with the same intensity he had brought to his music. He walked in meditation for so many hours each day that his feet grew sore. He slept very little. He ate barely enough to keep him standing. After many months of this, The young monk was discouraged. He had pushed himself harder than anyone else. He felt no closer to the peace he was seeking. One evening he began to think about leaving the path. Perhaps the way of the Buddha was not for him. Perhaps he should return to his old life and play music again. He sat alone at the edge of the practice grounds that evening. He thought of his old life. He thought of the music he used to make. He thought of the people who used to come to hear him play, and how they would close their eyes when a certain melody reached them. He had loved that life. He had given it up to follow the Buddha because he had felt, in some quiet way, that the path of music was not deep enough for him. But now, on this tired evening, he wondered if he had been wrong. Maybe the path of music had been deep enough after all. Maybe he was not made for this harder path. The Buddha heard about this. He came quietly to where the young monk was sitting and sat down beside him in the cool of the evening. "I have heard that you were once a musician," the Buddha said. "Is it true?" The young monk nodded. "Yes, teacher. I played the lute. I was good at it." The Buddha smiled. "Then tell me," he said, "when you played the lute, what happened if the strings were too tight?" "The strings would break," said the young monk, "or they would make a harsh sound that no one wanted to hear." "And what happened if the strings were too loose?" "They would not sing at all," said the young monk. "There would be no music." And when the strings were tuned just right, the young monk smiled for the first time in many weeks. Then the lute would sing beautifully. Then there was music. The Buddha nodded slowly. "So it is with practice," he said. "Strain too hard, and you will exhaust yourself. Slacken off, and you will not move at all. Tune your effort in the middle. Then there will be music." The young monk understood. He stayed on the path. He stopped straining so hard. He stopped thinking of giving up. He tuned his life in the middle like a string, and his practice began to deepen on its own. This story has been told in the Buddhist tradition for over 2,000 years. It contains the whole of the fourth truth in a few words. The path is the middle way. The Buddha taught 8 aspects of this path. They are sometimes called right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The word right in these 8 is gentler than it sounds. It does not mean correct in some strict, judging sense. It means well-tuned, in harmony, like the lute string, neither too tight nor too loose. The Buddhist tradition often groups these 8 into 3 soft areas of life. The first area is wisdom. It is about how we see and what we intend. The path asks us to see things as they actually are, including their changefulness and their deep connection to one another. It asks us to bring an intention of goodwill to our days, rather than an intention of grasping or harm. This sounds simple, but it is the work of a lifetime. The path asks us, again and again, to soften the layers of our seeing, to look without grasping. And under the grasping, the world is often much kinder than it appears. The second area is conduct. It is about how we move through the world with other beings. The path invites us to speak in ways that bring more peace than pain, to act in ways that respect what is alive, to work, if we can, in a way that does not require us to wound the world to live in it. These qualities are not rules. They are the natural shape of a heart turning toward peace. The kinder we become, the lighter our days. The third area is meditation. It is about how we work with our own mind. We bring a steady, gentle effort to whatever we are doing. We pay attention to what is actually here, instead of drifting in thought all day. The mind is allowed to grow quiet and steady over time, the same way a pool of water becomes clear when no one is stirring it. Together, these three areas form one whole life. Wisdom without conduct stays in the head. Conduct without wisdom becomes rigid. Both without inner steadiness do not hold. When all three grow together over time, a quiet life begins to form. These are the 8 aspects of the path. The Buddha did not present them as 8 separate steps to climb in order. He presented them as 8 qualities that grow together, gradually, in a life that has begun to turn toward peace. There is a verse in the Dhammapada, one of the oldest collections of the Buddha's sayings, that captures the spirit of the fourth truth. It says, simply, drop by drop is the water pot filled. The path is not walked all at once. No one becomes free in a day. No one becomes wise in a week. The water pot fills drop by drop. A small moment of attention. A small kindness. A return to the present. A letting go. A noticing of what is here. Each is a drop. Over months and years, the drops gather. The pot fills. The life becomes something it could not have been when we were straining to make it happen. This is what the Buddhist tradition has always known about the path. It is not an emergency. It is not a sprint. It is a long, slow filling, a quiet ripening, something that happens on its own when the conditions are gentle enough. There is a Zen story about the path that fits well here. Long ago, a young student came to an old Zen teacher and asked, "Master, how long will it take me to reach awakening if I practice very hard?" The teacher thought for a moment. "About 10 years, he said." The student was eager. "And if I practice twice as hard, with all my strength, day and night?" The teacher said, "About 20 years. The student was startled. "And if I work 3 times as hard?" "About 30 years, said the teacher. The student finally asked why. The teacher smiled and said, "When one eye is fixed on the destination, only one eye is left to find the way." The fourth truth is the gentle reminder that the path is walked one step at a time, not for the sake of arriving, for the sake of walking. The Buddhist tradition does not ask us to become someone different. It asks us to become more fully who we already are, to live a life of gentle attention, to meet our days with kindness, to soften the gripping where we can, to let the seasons turn through us, to rest when rest is what is here, to act when action is what is needed, to notice in each small moment that the moment is enough. This is the path. It begins exactly where you are. The very breath you are taking now is a step on it. The Buddha lived for many years after his awakening. He walked from village to village, teaching the 4 noble truths to anyone who would listen. He taught kings and beggars. He taught merchants and farmers. He taught old people and young people. He taught those who came to him in tears and those who came to him simply curious. To all of them, he gave the same 4 truths. Difficulty is part of life. Grasping makes it heavier. The grasping can be released. And there is a gentle path that helps the release happen, drop by drop, over the course of an ordinary lifetime. The path is still here. It has been carried with great care through every century since. Many millions of people have walked some part of it. Some walked it as Buddhist monks in robes. Some walked it as Zen masters in mountain huts. Some walked it as ordinary householders, raising children, growing food, going about their lives. The path does not require a particular form of life. It only asks for a heart that is willing to begin again, gently, one step at a time. You do not have to do anything special tonight to be on the path. You are already on it. The willingness to listen, to soften, to allow these old teachings to settle in you, that is already a step. There is no first step that needs to be found. The first step is the one you are taking now. There is a phrase that comes down to us from one of the oldest Buddhist texts. It says, "The way is wide, and there is room for everyone." The path does not belong to anyone. It does not require a special talent or a special past. It welcomes all who walk it. Slow walkers, fast walkers, walkers who stop often to rest, walkers who get lost and find their way back. The path is patient. It has been patient for 2,500 years. It will be patient with you. The Four Noble Truths are now fully told. Difficulty is woven through life. Grasping turns it into long suffering. The grasping can be released. The path that helps the release is the middle way, walked with gentle attention, one breath at a time. These four truths have settled in the heart of every Buddhist teaching ever spoken. Many other teachings flow from them. Stories, practices, traditions, ways of living. But underneath them all are the four. They are like the four legs of a quiet wooden stool. They have held up the whole tradition for a very long time. And here is the most generous thing about them. They are not asking you to become anyone other than who you are. They are not asking you to add anything to your life. They are simply pointing at what is already true and inviting you to live in friendly company with it. The difficulty that comes and goes. The grasping that softens when noticed. The freedom that shows through the openings. The path that walks itself, drop by drop, when we are willing to walk slowly. Let us pause here for a few breaths. The body can soften. The mind can rest. There is nowhere else you need to go. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a garden in this very old story. Several gardens, in fact, in 3 different palaces for 3 different seasons of the year. The gardens are full of flowering trees, of stone fountains, of quiet paths and deep pools where fish glide slowly through the shadows. The air smells of jasmine and cedar, and in the rainy months, of the long, warm rain that comes off the mountains. In the gardens lives a young prince. He is the son of a king. He has lived inside these walls for almost 30 years, and not once has he stepped beyond them. This is the story of the Buddha before he was the Buddha. It has been preserved in Buddhist tradition for over 2,000 years. It is, in some ways, the story of all of us. The walls are different. The garden is different. But many people live for a long time inside something carefully protected until something quiet inside begins to ask, is this all there is? The story begins with a child being born to a king and queen in the foothills of the mountains of northern India. The kingdom was small, but prosperous. The land was green. The skies were wide. The mountains in the distance held snow even in summer. When the child was born, the king sent for a wise man to come down from the forest and bless his son. The wise man was very old. He had spent his life in retreat, in a small hut near a spring, eating only what people brought to him. He rarely came down to the palaces. But when he heard about the king's son, he came. The wise man arrived dusty from the road. He bathed and ate a small meal. Then he came into the king's chamber and held the infant in his hands. He looked at the child for a long time. When he spoke at last, his voice was soft. He said, "This child will become either a great king who rules many lands, or a great teacher whose wisdom will travel even further than any kingdom can. The choice will be made by the child himself, in time." The king listened carefully. He thanked the wise man and sent him on his way with gifts of fine cloth and good food. The wise man took the cloth but left the food for others and went back up the mountain to his small hut. That evening, the king sat alone with his wife. They were quiet for a long time. Finally, the king spoke. "You heard what he said?" he said. "Two paths." "Yes," said the queen softly. "I heard." "I do not want my son to wander the roads with a bowl," said the king. "I want him to wear my crown. I want him to rule what I have built." The queen looked down at the sleeping infant beside her for a long moment. Then she said gently, "The wise man did not say one path was better than the other. He said the choice would be made by the child himself." The king was quiet. He loved his witties. He had spoken of two true ones, the kingdom or the wider wisdom, and in her heart she suspected which one her son would choose, though she said nothing more about it to anyone. So the king made a plan. He would build a world for his son in which there was no reason to wander. A world so beautiful, so full of joy and music and ease, that the son would have no question worth seeking the answer to. He would surround the boy with everything good, and he would keep out everything difficult. This was how the gardens were built. The king built 3 palaces, one for the hot months, one for the rainy months, one for the cool months. Around each palace he built walls of pale stone, and inside the walls he laid out the gardens. In the gardens he placed everything beautiful that he could think of. There were flowering trees from all the kingdoms of the region, jasmine and oleander, and small trees whose blossoms looked like white stars in the evening. There were ponds with white and blue and red lotuses that opened in the morning and closed at night. There were marble fountains carved with the shapes of birds. There were stone walkways smooth as old wood. There were pavilions for resting, with silk cushions, where the prince could sit and read in the cool of the afternoon. There were small bridges over narrow streams. There were courtyards with pale sand raked into careful patterns each morning. There were peacocks who walked the paths slowly, their long tails trailing behind them. There were songbirds in the trees, kept content with seed and clean water, who sang at first light and again at evening. There were musicians who played for the prince at every meal. There were poets who recited verses while he ate. There were athletes who taught him how to ride a horse, how to draw a bow, how to swim. There were teachers who taught him many languages, and the histories of his kingdom and the kingdoms beyond, and the names of the stars. The king gave careful instructions to everyone in the prince's world. No one was to grow old in front of him. No one was to fall ill in front of him. No one was to weep in front of him. The servants who became ill were quietly sent away and given good homes and replaced with healthy ones. The flowers that wilted were cleared away in the night and replaced with fresh ones. The musicians and dancers were all young. If a leaf fell, it was swept away before the prince could see it. If a fountain stopped working, it was fixed before he noticed. The world inside the walls was kept beautiful at all times by many hands working quietly out of sight. This is how the prince grew up. He grew up in beauty. He grew up surrounded by smiling faces. He learned to ride horses, to play music, to read and write the languages of his land. He learned to recite the old poems. He learned how to govern, since one day he would be a king. He grew tall and strong. He was kind. He was gentle. The people who worked for him loved him because he was never cruel to them. When he was 16, the king arranged for him to marry. The bride was chosen for her beauty and her good heart. She was a young woman from a noble family in a neighboring kingdom. She had been raised, in her own way, behind her own kind of garden walls. The two of them liked each other immediately. They became close companions. After some years, they had a son. He was small and round and sweet, with his father's quiet eyes. The prince loved him. He used to carry the boy through the gardens in the early morning, before the heat came, showing him the birds and the flowers. One morning, walking with the boy along the edge of one of the pools, the prince found a small green leaf on the stone path. He picked it up and showed it to his son. The boy reached out and touched it with one careful finger. The two of them stood there for a long time, looking at the leaf together. The musicians began their morning playing somewhere in the gardens. The fountains came on. The light grew. The prince held his son a little closer and tried to remember exactly this morning, this leaf, this small finger reaching out, this peace. He did not know why he wanted to remember it so carefully. He only knew that he did. By every measure the world knew, the young prince had everything. He had a beautiful home and a loving family. He had work that suited him. He had pleasure and ease and safety and every external thing arranged in his favor. Several years went by like this. The prince was 25, then 28, then 29. From the outside, his life was beautiful. Every day was bright. Every meal was fine. Every evening had music and good company. The gardens kept their flowers. The walls kept their secrets. The world the king had built held together perfectly. But there was a feeling. The prince could not have named it if you had asked him. It was very quiet. It came in soft moments, when he was alone in the garden, or when he was sitting by one of the pools watching the fish move through the water. It came when he held his son and thought, without knowing why, that the small boy in his arms was somehow more vulnerable than the palace seemed to admit. It came when he looked at his wife's face in the lamplight and felt a tenderness so sharp it almost hurt. It came in his sleep sometimes too. He had dreams he could not quite remember in the morning, except for the feeling they left behind. A feeling of standing at a window at dusk and looking out, not at the gardens, but at something far beyond them. A feeling that something was missing. A feeling that this beautiful life was somehow not the whole of life. A feeling that he had been seeing only one face of the world for a long time, and that there were other faithing like this. The servants did not have the words. His wife did not have the words. His father certainly did not. Once, the prince tried to mention something of this feeling to one of his close companions, a young man who had grown up with him in the palaces. They were walking together in the gardens in the evening, before dinner. "Sometimes," the prince said quietly, "I feel as if there is something I am supposed to know, something I have not yet learned." The companion looked at him with kind confusion. "My prince," he said, "you have everything anyone could want. What more could there be?" The prince smiled and let the conversation move on. He did not try to speak of the feeling again. It was not something the companions of his old life could meet him in. But the feeling did not go away. It grew, very slowly, season by season. There is a teaching in the Buddhist tradition that points at what was happening to the prince in those years. The Buddha himself, much later in his life, would describe this time of his youth as a kind of beautiful sleep. He spoke about it gently, without any harsh words for his father. He said that he had been delicate, very delicate. He said that lotus ponds had been made for him, with white lotuses and red lotuses and blue lotuses. He said that he had worn only the finest cloth, brought from far countries. He said that even on the rare occasions when he was outside in the sun, servants held a silk parasol over his head to keep the brightness from touching his skin. He described all of this as a kind of gentle confinement. A confinement so soft that he had not known he was confined. And yet, even inside that beautiful confinement, the quiet feeling had grown. There is something in us, the Buddhist tradition says, that knows. Even when everything outside is arranged to keep us asleep, something inside slowly wakes. The walls of the garden can be very high and very lovely, but the truth of being alive will find its way through, eventually, in some small moment when no one is looking. The prince did not know it yet, but his life was about to turn. Not because anything had gone wrong inside the gardens. Nothing had gone wrong. The flowers still bloomed. The musicians still played. His wife still loved him. His son still slept peacefully in his small bed. The walls of the palace still held. But the prince had begun to ask questions that no one in the gardens could answer. He wanted to see the city beyond the walls. He wanted to see how other people lived their days. He wanted to know what his father had been keeping from him all these years. He was not yet 30 years old. The story was just beginning. There is something worth pausing on here before the next part of the story comes. The prince had what most people would call a perfect life. And still, inside him, was that quiet feeling, the sense that something was missing. Many people in our own time know this feeling. They have done what the world told them to do. They have built their version of the gardens. They have the home, the family, the work, the comforts. And yet in some quiet hour, they feel it too. The sense that beneath the beautiful surface of their life, some deeper question is waiting. The Buddhist tradition says this feeling is not a problem. It is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is the seed of waking. It is the beginning of the path. The prince in the gardens was not failing his life. He was being called toward a wider one. The wider life would not arrive all at once. It would arrive slowly, through a series of small encounters with the world beyond the walls. In the next part of the story, the prince finally goes out. He sees 4 things he was not meant to see. They will change him forever. But that is for later. For tonight, it is enough to rest in the gardens with the prince, to feel the soft air of the evening, to hear the distant fountains, to know that something inside him is beginning to stir, gently, like the first faint light before dawn. The gardens are still here in this story. The walls are still standing, but the door is already beginning to open, even though no one in the palace has heard it move. Let us pause here for a few breaths. The body can rest. The mind can soften. There is no journey you need to take tonight. When you are ready, we will continue together. There came a morning when the young prince could no longer wait. He had spent almost 30 years inside the gardens. He had walked every path, bathed in every pool, heard every song the musicians knew. The walls had been beautiful for many years, but now he felt them. He went to his father one morning and asked, very softly, "Father, may I go out and see the city beyond the gates?" His father was alarmed. He had spent his son's whole life keeping difficult things from him. He had built 3 palaces and 3 gardens for this very reason. But he could see in his son's eyes that something had changed. The prince was no longer a boy. The questions in him would not be quieted by another season of music and feasts. So the king agreed. But he made his own careful plan. For days before the prince was to go out, the king sent messengers throughout the capital city. The messengers carried instructions. Every street the prince would travel must be cleaned. Every house along the route must be decorated with flowers. Every person on the streets must be young, healthy, and well-dressed. Anyone who was old, anyone who was ill, anyone who was poor or grieving must remain inside, hidden from view, until the prince had passed. The king wanted his son's first glimpse of the world to be as beautiful as the gardens. He thought that if the city looked like an extension of the palace, the prince would come home satisfied, and the quiet feeling in him would settle. On the morning of the outing, the streets were ready. The flowers were strung. The young, smiling people lined the route. The prince climbed into a fine carriage with his trusted driver, and they rode out through the palace gates and into the city. The prince had thought, for many years, that he knew what was beyond the walls. He had imagined cities full of houses and busy people. He had imagined marketplaces and rivers and roads. He had not imagined any of it well. The gardens had no markets. They had no streets crowded with strangers. They had no smells of cooking from open doorways. The prince was, in a quiet way, going to a foreign country, even though the country was his own. For a while, everything went according to the king's plan. The prince looked out from his carriage with wide eyes. He saw the bright streets and the flowers. He saw the smiling people. He saw the brightly painted houses, the open marketplaces, the busy fountains, the children running in the lanes, the small dogs sleeping in patches of sun. Then, almost at the end of the journey, he saw something else. By the side of the road, leaning on a long wooden staff, was an old man. The old man was bent with age. His back curved like a slow river bend. His hair was white. His skin was thin and folded into many soft lines. He moved very slowly. He stopped to rest after every few steps. Somehow, despite the king's careful preparations, this one old traveler had slipped through. Perhaps he had not heard the announcement. Perhaps he had wandered in from another village. In Buddhist tradition, it is said that the messengers came when they were meant to come, no matter what the king did to prevent them. The prince saw the old man and his face changed. He turned to his driver, who was an honest man and had served the family for many years. "Friend," the prince said, "what is happening to that man? Why is he like that? The driver was quiet for a moment. He had not been instructed to lie, and he did not lie. He said, "My prince, that is an old man. His body has lived for many years. The body changes as the years pass. The hair turns white. The back bends. The strength fades. This happens to all people who live long enough." The prince said, "To all people?" The driver said, "Yes, my prince. To you, to me, to everyone." The prince rode home in silence that day. The streets were still bright. The flowers were still in bloom. The young people were still smiling. But the prince could no longer see any of it. He could only see the old man, and the long wooden staff, and the bent back, and the very slow steps. When he came back to the palace, he did not eat dinner with his wife that night. He sat alone in one of the small pavilions in the garden. The musicians did not know what to play for him, so they played softly, hoping to soothe him. He did not hear them. He was thinking about the old man and about the words of his driver. Everybody lives for many years. Everybody changes as the years pass. It happens to all people. To you, to me, to everyone. A few weeks later, when the prince had recovered some of his spirit, the king arranged a second outing. This time he was even more careful. He sent more messengers. He made the streets even more beautiful. He hoped that the second journey would heal the first. The prince rode out again. The streets were lined with the same flowers. The same young people stood and waved. The prince looked out from his carriage and tried to enjoy what he saw. Then, in a quiet side street, he saw a second sight. A man lying by the side of the road, very weak. The man could barely lift his head. His skin was pale. His breathing was shallow and uneven. A small child sat beside him, holding a cup of water, trying to help him drink. The prince turned to his driver, "Ill. Bodies are made of many small parts, and the parts do not always work as they should. Sometimes the body is well, and sometimes it is not. This happens to all people." The prince said, "To all people?" The driver said, "Yes, my prince. Sometimes lightly, sometimes more heavily. But all people, to you, to me, to everyone." The prince rode home in even deeper silence. The world was now two messengers heavier. Aging, illness. Two truths that his father's gardens had hidden from him for nearly 30 years. He spent days alone in the gardens after that, sitting by the pools, watching the fish. The musicians played. He did not hear them. The flowers bloomed. He did not see them. Something inside him was changing. The king became worried. He did not understand what was happening to his son. He thought that perhaps one more careful outing would help. Perhaps the prince had simply been unlucky on the first two journeys. The king sent more messengers. He cleaned the streets a third time. He prepared everything as carefully as he had ever prepared anything. The third outing was the most beautiful yet. The streets were full of music. Children threw flower petals as the carriage passed. The sky was clear. The air was warm. But once again, something slipped through. In a quiet street, the prince saw a small procession. The people walked slowly, dressed in pale cloth. In their midst, carried with great care, was someone they had loved. They were on their way to the river, where in those days the rites of farewell were performed. The mourners were weeping softly. They held one another. They walked at the pace of grief. The prince had never seen anything like this. He turned to his driver. "Friend, who are those people? Where are they going?" The driver was quiet. This was the hardest one to tell. But he was an honest man. He said, "My prince, those people are saying goodbye to someone they loved. Every life has a beginning, and every life, in time, comes to its end. The mourners are walking with their loved one last time before letting them rest." The prince said, "Does this happen to everyone?" The driver said, "Yes, my prince. Every life has its own length. None of us know how long, but every life, in its own time, comes home. This is part of being alive." The prince did not weep. He sat very still in the carriage. The carriage went on. He did not see the rest of the route. He did not hear the music. The soft sound of the mourners stayed with him for a long time after he came home. That night he could not sleep. He walked alone through the gardens by moonlight. The fountains were still. The flowers were folded for the night. The lotuses on the pools had closed their petals. He sat by one of the pools and watched the moon move slowly across the water. He thought about the three messengers: the old man, the unwell man, the procession by the road. He thought about everyone he loved, about his wife sleeping in their chamber, about his small son, about his father, about himself. Three truths that the gardens had hidden from him. Three truths that no garden could hide forever. He stayed in his chambers for many days after the third outing. He did not see his father. He did not eat at the regular tables. He saw his wife only briefly, and only to be kind to her. He held his son one evening for a long time, looking quietly at his small face. The truths of the road were not only for him, they were for every living being. He understood that now. The understanding was tender and full, but beneath the tenderness, somewhere, was a small, clear question. If all of this is true, then what is the path? Is there one? Is there a way of being alive that meets these truths without breaking? A few days later, the prince asked for one more outing. The king was hesitant, but he agreed. Perhaps a final beautiful journey would help his son recover. This time, on the way home, the prince saw a fourth person, a man walking quietly along the road, alone, dressed in a simple yellow robe. The man carried a wooden bowl. His hair was shaved short. He walked slowly, with a peaceful step. His face was steady and bright. He did not look hurried. He did not look worried. He looked at the world with calm eyes. The prince turned to his driver, more puzzled by this one than by the others. "Friend, who is that man? Why is he walking alone? Why is he dressed like that?" The driver smiled gently. "My prince, that is a wandering teacher. He has left his home and his old life to seek wisdom. He owns nothing but the robe on his back and the bowl in his hand. He eats whatever kind people offer him. He walks from village to village. He sits in the forests and meditates. He is looking for the truths that go deeper than the things of this world." The prince watched the wandering teacher for a long time as the carriage passed. The teacher did not look at him. He was simply walking, peaceful, complete in himself, free. The prince had seen aging and illness and the end of a life. He had felt all three, press into his heart. But here, at last, was someone who walked through a world that contained all of these things and who looked at peace, who looked free, who looked as if he had found something the gardens could never give. The Buddhist tradition calls these 4 sights the 4 messengers. They came to the prince at the time when he was ready to see them. They did not come to wound him. They came to wake him. The prince came home from the 4th outing changed. He did not say much to his wife at dinner. He held his son for a long time that evening. He went to the highest balcony of the palace and stood there, looking out over the gardens, toward the walls, and beyond the walls to the city, and beyond the city to the hills and the wide world he had never known. He understood now what the wise man had said when he was a baby. He understood the choice. He understood that the gardens were beautiful, but that they were also walls, and that the truth of being alive was waiting for him beyond them. The Buddhist tradition says that this is what every awakening looks like, in some form. We grow up inside our own version of the gardens. We do not know they are gardens. The walls are kind. The flowers are real. But one day, in some quiet way, the messengers come. We see something we were not meant to see. The years pressing into someone we love. A difficulty we cannot smooth away. The end of something we thought would last. And the questions begin. The questions the gardens could not answer. The Buddhist tradition does not ask us to be grateful for the difficulty. It only asks us to listen when the messengers come and to let them point us in the direction we are meant to go. The prince stood on the balcony that night for a long time. The stars were very bright over the mountains. The palace below him was quiet. His wife and son were asleep in their chambers. His father slept in his own. The gardens, washed silver by moonlight, looked almost the same as they had looked all his life. But the prince could no longer stay in them. The 4 messengers had pointed somewhere else. The next part of his story tells what he did with what they had shown him. But for tonight, it is enough to know that the messengers came, that they did their gentle work, and that they set him on the path that would, in time, lead him home. The path he was about to walk would take him far from the gardens. It would take him further than his father ever imagined. It would take him through hardship and through searching and through long nights of deep stillness under wide skies. But it would, in the end, bring him to a freedom that the gardens could never have given him. The gardens had been a kind of preparation, even though the king never meant them to be. The walls had to be there for him to one day step beyond them. The flowers had to be beautiful for him to learn, by contrast, what beauty alone cannot answer. Let us rest here for a few breaths. The body can soften. The mind can grow still. There is nothing further you need to understand tonight. When you are ready, we will continue together. There came a night when the young prince stood at the edge of his palace gardens and looked out into the dark. The moon was high. The fountains were silent. Everyone he loved was asleep behind him in the palace. His wife, his small son, his father, the dancers and musicians and servants who had watched him grow up. He stood there for a long time. The night air was cool. The path back to his chamber was a few steps behind him. The path forward, beyond the gates, was unmarked. He was almost 30 years old. He had seen the 4 messengers. He could not pretend he had not seen them. He turned away from the palace and walked through the gardens to the outer wall. The gatekeeper was asleep at his post. The prince passed him quietly, like a shadow. Beyond the gate, the road stretched into the dark hills. He stepped onto the road. He did not look back. The first stars were still in the sky. The road dust was cool under his sandals. A small breeze moved through the trees beside the road. He walked steadily. He did not run. He had been running, in some way, for many months, and now that he was finally on the road, there was no more need to run. The path opened in front of him, one step at a time. The palace fell behind him, one step at a time. The first true freedom of his life was the simple act of walking. This is one of the most well-known moments in Buddhist tradition. It is called the going forth. The young prince walks out of the gardens, away from his old life, into the wide world. From this moment, he is no longer a prince. He is a seeker. The story will not end with his return to the palace. The story will end somewhere none of his servants or his father can imagine. He walked for many hours. By dawn, he was far from the palace, near the edge of a forest. He stopped at a small clearing by a stream. He took off his fine silken clothes, the kind he had worn since he was a child, and exchanged them with a passing hunter for a simple yellow robe. He took the long knife the hunter carried, and with his own hand, he cut off his long dark hair. When he stood up, he no longer looked like a prince. He looked like one of the wandering teachers he had seen from the carriage. The man who had seemed so peaceful, who had walked through the world with calm eyes. He bathed in the stream. He drank some water. He took the simple bowl the hunter had given him, and he walked into the forest. For a long time, no one in the palace knew where he had gone. His father searched for him. His wife waited. The kingdom waited for the prince to return. He did not return. He had begun a journey that would last 6 years. The Buddhist tradition holds great tenderness for this part of the story. The young seeker had given up everything he knew, not because the things he gave up were bad, but because he was looking for something that those things could not give him. He had loved his wife. He had loved his son. He had loved his father. He left them not because he had stopped loving them, but because he was beginning to suspect that the deepest love would only be possible if he first understood what he was. And to understand that, he had to walk away for a while. In those years, he became one seeker among many in the forests and mountains of northern India. It was a region where many teachers lived in those days. There were forests full of small huts. There were caves, and went on. He walked from one teacher to another in those months. Some lived in caves. Some lived in small wooden huts in the forest. Some lived in groups, eating from one common pot. He met many kinds of seekers along the way. He listened to all of them. He learned what he could from each one. The road was longer than he had thought when he first stepped onto it beyond the palace gates. He learned them so well that the teacher said, "Stay with me, and we will lead this group of students together." But again, when the young seeker came out of the deep states, the questions returned. There was something the practice was not reaching. He thanked his second teacher and went on. He spent some years like this, going from teacher to teacher, learning from each one, coming up against the same quiet limit each time. The peace was real. The peace was beautiful. But the peace did not last. As soon as he left the meditation cushion and walked back into the world, the old grasping returned, and with it, the old suffering. So he tried a different way. He had heard about a group of ascetics who lived in a forest at the foot of the great mountains. They believed that the body itself was the source of suffering. They believed that if you weakened the body enough, denied it enough, the mind would finally be free. They lived in great hardship. They ate almost nothing. They slept very little. They sat for many hours in places where ordinary people could not bear to be. The young seeker found this group. He joined them. He began the harshest practices the ancient world knew. For 6 years, he denied himself almost everything. He taught to the very edge of what a human body could bear. The young seeker tried the path of extreme hardship more completely than anyone else in his group. The other ascetics admired him. They thought he would be the first among them to find freedom. But after 6 years of this, the young seeker had not found freedom. He had only grown weaker. One day he sat alone by a river. He was very thin. He was very tired. He had been pushing himself for so long that he could no longer think clearly. He could barely walk. He looked into the river. He saw his own reflection. Something quiet shifted in him. He thought about his life, about the gardens, about the messengers on the road, about all the teachers he had followed and all the practices he had tried, about the deep meditations and the long fasting and the hours of stillness. None of it had worked, and he had a memory, sudden and bright. He remembered being a small boy, sitting beneath a tree at the edge of a field on a festival day. He had been alone in the shade. He had not been doing anything special, and without trying at all, he had fallen into a deep, easy peace, a peace as natural as breath. He had not thought of that afternoon in many years, but it was here now, clear as the river in front of him. He thought, perhaps this is the way. Perhaps the path is not in pushing harder. Perhaps the path is in something gentler, something more like that quiet afternoon under the tree. It was a quiet thought. It did not arrive with thunder. It arrived gently, as old truths sometimes do, settling into him as if it had been waiting in him all along. He sat with it for a long time. The river kept moving in front of him. The light slowly changed over the water, and for the first time in 6 years, he was not trying to make anything happen. He was simply sitting. The sitting itself was beginning to feel like the answer. Just then, a young woman came down to the river. She lived in a village nearby and had come to fetch water. She saw the very thin man sitting on the bank. She had brought a small bowl of rice and milk with her, in case she met someone who needed it. She came forward shyly and knelt beside him. "Please," she said softly, "I have brought this. It is very simple. Just rice and milk. But you look as if you have not eaten in many days." The young seeker looked at the bowl for a long time. He had not eaten properly in years. He had been taught that to accept such food was to weaken his practice. The other ascetics would scorn him if they saw. She spoke again, even more gently. "My grandmother used to say that a holy man should not refuse food offered with kindness. She said it would be a sadness for the one who offered it." The young seeker looked up at her. He saw a young woman with a worn shawl and steady, kind eyes. There was nothing complicated about her. She had simply walked down to the river with a bowl because she thought someone might need it. He had just realized that pushing harder was not the way. So he reached out and he took the bowl and he thanked her. He ate slowly. The rice and milk were the best meal of his life. When he had finished, he handed the bowl back to her. "Thank you," he said. "You have given me more than you know." She bowed and smiled, not quite sure what he meant. Then she rose, picked up her water jar, and went back to her village. When the other ascetics heard, they were disappointed. They had thought him a great seeker. Now they thought him a fallen one. They left him by the river and went deeper into the forest without him. The young seeker did not mind. Something in him was clear now, for the first time in 6 years. He sat by the river, his strength slowly returning, and he began to feel what would come next. The Buddhist tradition says that this was the moment of the middle way, the moment when the young seeker turned away from both extremes. The indulgence of the gardens, where every wish had been fulfilled. The harshness of the ascetics, where every wish had been denied. Both had brought him to a wall. The path he needed was a third one, a middle way, something steadier and more in keeping with what a human body and mind actually need. He stayed by the river for some days, eating simple food when it was offered, drinking water when he was thirsty, resting his body. His strength returned. The light came back into his eyes. He began to walk along the river in the cool of the evenings, watching the herons step quietly in the shallows. He thought about the years he had spent, the years in the gardens, the years with the teachers, the years among the ascetics. None of those years had been wasted exactly. Each one had taught him something. The gardens had taught him that pleasure does not satisfy. The teachers had taught him that deep states do not last. The ascetics had taught him that punishing the body does not free the heart. What he needed now was a path that did not depend on any of those things. A path that worked from the inside, not the outside. A path that could be walked in any life, by anyone, without leaving the body behind and without filling it with more and more. He did not yet know what that path looked like, but he knew that the seeking he had done so far had brought him to this point. And he knew that whatever came next would be different from anything that had come before. The Buddhist tradition has preserved this story for over 2,000 years because it tells us something we need to hear. The seekers we admire most did not get there by pushing themselves to break. They got there by learning, finally, how to stop pushing and start listening. The deepest things in us cannot be forced. They have to be allowed. The young seeker had spent 6 years trying to force the deepest thing in him to come forth. It would not come. The moment he stopped trying to force it, it began, very quietly, to arrive on its own. It would not be long now before he sat beneath a great tree, the last tree of his long journey, and let the long night settle around him. The night that, in Buddhist tradition, would change everything. But that is for the next part of the story. For tonight, the young seeker is by the river. He is thin and tired, but for the first time in many years, his mind is quiet. He understands something he did not understand in the palace and did not understand among the ascetics. He understands that the path is not a war. The path is not a victory over anything. The path is a gentle return to what is already true, walked one breath at a time, with both hands open. This is the seed of everything that comes next. The Buddha, when he finally sat beneath the great tree, would carry this insight with him. The middle way had been found by the river. The deeper awakening would happen under the tree. But the river came first. The willingness to set down the extreme. The willingness to accept simple food. The willingness to be gentle with the very body he had been punishing for 6 long years. That gentleness was, in some quiet way, already the beginning of his awakening. Let us pause here for a few breaths. The body can rest. The mind can grow still. There is no path you need to walk tonight. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a small boy in this very old story. He is perhaps 7 years old, perhaps 8. He is sitting alone in the shade on a festival day in his father's kingdom. He is the same person who will one day be the Buddha, but that is many years away. This is the day his heart first knew what it was. The festival was held once a year in the small kingdom in the foothills of the mountains. It marked the beginning of the planting season. On that day, the king and the men of the court would go out into the ceremonial fields and turn the first earth with wooden plows. The whole kingdom watched. The musicians played. The children ran in the long grass. The women brought baskets of rice cakes wrapped in green leaves. The kingdom only had a few of these festivals each year, and this was the most cherished one. There was a feeling in the air that all of life depended on what happened on this day. The good of the harvest, the good of the kingdom, the good of every family that planted seed. Everyone came who could come, even the very old people, with their soft white hair, sat in the shade and watched. The small prince had been brought out for the festival. He was old enough now to begin learning the customs of his father's house. Servants had set up a small canopy of white silk at the edge of the field, with cushions inside, and the boy had been placed there to watch. After a while, the day grew hot. The servants thought the boy might be more comfortable under the trees at the edge of the field, where the shade was deep. They moved him there, then drifted off to watch the ploughing. So the small boy sat alone, under a wide tree, in the shade. The tree had soft round leaves and small fruits. In Buddhist tradition, it is remembered as a rose apple tree. The boy could see, through the leaves, the slow movement of the festival in the bright sun. He could hear the music. He could see the long line of men with their wooden plows. He could see his father, the king, far away across the field. The boy was quiet. He was not bored. He was not lonely. He was simply there. And then something happened to him. It was very small. He could not have named it, but it has been remembered for over 2,000 years in Buddhist tradition because of what it meant. The small boy sitting under the tree fell into a state of deep peace. He had not been trying. He had not been told to meditate. He had not been instructed to do anything. He had not even been thinking about peace. He did not know what peace was. He was just a small boy in the shade, watching the festival from a distance. His mind was simply quiet. His body was simply at ease. The shade was cool. The leaves above him moved gently. The festival happened far away in the sun. The boy sat under the tree, and inside him, very softly, something settled. He had no thought of the future, no thought of the past, no straining for anything, no pushing away of anything. He was simply where he was, in the shade of the tree, and inside him a quiet brightness shone for a little while. It did not last long. The festival ended. The servants came to find him. They brought him back to the palace. The day continued. The boy grew. He learned his languages. He learned his customs. He grew into the young prince who lived inside the gardens for almost 30 years. He forgot about the afternoon under the tree, but the afternoon did not forget him. In the Buddhist tradition, this small memory is treated with great tenderness. It is sometimes said that this was the boy's first taste of his own deepest nature. He had not made it happen. He had not earned it through effort. It was simply there, beneath all the other states, waiting to be noticed. Many people taste it once or twice in their early years, in some small moment, and then forget. The boy under the rose apple tree had tasted it more deeply than most, but he too had forgotten. Until that afternoon by the river, more than 20 years later, when he was nearing 35, thin from his long fasting, exhausted from his long searching, the memory came back. He was sitting on the bank. He was watching the slow water. He had just eaten the bowl of rice and milk a young woman had offered him. His companions, the ones he had practiced with for years, had walked off in disappointment because he had eaten. He was alone now, more alone than he had been since the night he left the palace. And the memory came. It did not arrive as words. It arrived as a feeling of cool shade, a feeling of small fruits hanging above him, a feeling of being a small boy, sitting under a tree, knowing in his small body the deep peace that he had been hunting all over the forest for the last 6 years. He sat very still on the riverbank. He let the memory speak to him. It said, "You have been looking for this in the wrong direction." It said, "The thing you are seeking is not somewhere far. It was already in you when you were a small boy." The memory said, "The path is not in pushing. The path is in stopping, in sitting, in allowing." And it said, "You have been trying to climb to a peace that is already at the bottom of you." The young seeker sat with this for a long time. The river kept moving. The light slowly changed. He understood, in some quiet way, what he had not understood through all his years of practice. The deepest peace was not earned. It was not won. It was already here. The work was not to make it happen. The work was to stop the busy effort that was hiding it. This is one of the great turnings of the Buddhist story. He spent some days by the river after that. He drank water. He ate simple food when it was offered to him by passing villagers. His strength slowly returned. The light came back into his eyes. The skin that had grown thin and dry began to soften again. He walked along the river in the cool of the evenings. He watched the herons step in the shallows. He noticed the small wildflowers growing in the grass at the water's edge. He had not noticed wildflowers in many years. He was beginning to notice many small things again. The bend of a reed in the current, the shape of a cloud over the hills, the pattern of footprints children left on the bank of the river. He was returning, slowly, to his own senses. The years of austerity had built a wall between him and the simple world. The wall was thinning now. He was preparing, though he could not have said in words for what. There is a teaching in the Zen tradition that points at what was happening in him during those quiet days. It is sometimes called beginner's mind. the mind that has set down everything it learned and is willing to start again, fresh. The young seeker had spent 6 years gathering. He was now, in some quiet way, setting down what the teachers had told him, setting down what the ascetics had taught him, setting down even his own ideas about what he was looking for. He was becoming light, empty, open, ready. The Zen tradition says that this kind of emptiness is not poverty. It is the most useful thing in the world. A cup that is full of yesterday's tea cannot hold today's. The young seeker was emptying his cup. By the time it was empty, he would be able to receive what he had been chasing for so long. After some days, he stood up from the riverbank. His strength had returned enough for him to walk. He knew where he wanted to go. There was a wide tree he had passed once in his travels, on the other side of the country, in a quiet place near a small village. It had been a beautiful tree. He had not stopped at it then. He had been hurrying somewhere else. But the tree had stayed in his mind. He decided to walk to it. He would sit beneath it. He would not get up again until he had found what he was looking for. This was a quiet decision. He did not tell anyone. He did not announce it. He did not even say it out loud to himself. He simply began walking. The decision was in the walking. He walked for some days. He passed villages and rice fields. He passed other seekers on the road, but did not stop to talk with them. He passed small streams and cattle resting in the shade of trees and children carrying water. He kept walking. The destination grew closer with every step. One evening, as the sun was lowering, he came past a small farmhouse. A woman was outside, drawing water from a well. She saw him on the road and stopped. "Friend," she called out, "where are you going so late?" He paused. "I am walking to a tree I once passed," he said. She tilted her head, not quite understanding. Then she smiled. "Come and rest with us for the night. There is rice on the fire. The road will still be there in the morning." He bowed in thanks. He came in and sat with her family in their simple kitchen. They did not ask him many questions. They shared what they had. Her small children stared at him with quiet curiosity. After the meal, her husband showed him a clean corner of the barn where he could sleep. In the morning, before they woke, he rose quietly. He left a small bow at their doorstep and continued on the road. He slept like this many nights along the way, sometimes under a kind family's roof, sometimes simply under a tree. He ate what villagers offered him. He thanked them and walked on. He was not in a hurry. He had spent 6 years hurrying. The hurrying was over now. He walked at the pace of a person who has remembered that the road itself is part of the journey. In Buddhist tradition, this walk is remembered with quiet reverence. The young seeker was no longer the prince of the gardens. He was no longer the thin ascetic of the forest. He was something else now, something not yet named. He was a man walking toward a tree with a small handful of dried grass and a wooden bowl and a simple yellow robe and a deep willingness to sit until he understood. On the last evening of his walk, he came to a place near a small village. The river there was wide and calm. The land was green, and rising from the level ground, with its broad branches spreading wide above the fields, was the tree. It is remembered in Buddhist tradition as the Bodhi tree. The word means awakening. It would not get that name until later. On the evening the young seeker first arrived at it, it was simply a beautiful wide tree with long branches and a thick green canopy and a soft patch of grass beneath it where a person could sit. He stood at the edge of the field and looked at the tree for a long time. The sun was low. The light was warm and slow. Birds were settling in the branches for the night. He felt, in his quiet way, that this was the place. He felt that his long walking was about to end. Something in him knew that what he had been searching for through 6 years of hardship was very near. He stepped forward across the grass. He bowed to the tree, gently, as one might bow to a friend. Then he sat down beneath it, with his back against the wide trunk, and he settled himself for the long night ahead. He had brought a small handful of dried grass with him to sit on. He arranged it carefully under him. He crossed his legs. He rested his hands in his lap. He let his breath settle. He made a small, quiet vow inside himself. It was not a vow to anyone else. It was a vow to his own heart. He would not get up from beneath this tree until he had understood. He would not move. He would not strain. He would simply sit, with both hands open, and let the long night unfold, and let whatever needed to come, come. It was the most peaceful decision of his life. The sun set. The first stars came out over the village. The cattle in the fields lowered themselves to rest. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere a mother called her family in for the evening meal. The tree above him began its quiet night sounds. A small breeze moved through the leaves. The young seeker sat beneath the tree. The night was long, and what happened during it has been told in Buddhist tradition for over 2,000 years. But that is for the next part of the story. For tonight, it is enough to sit with him at the foot of the great tree, in the moment just before everything turned. To feel the cool of the evening, it is beginning. There is something gentle about this moment in the story. The young seeker has not yet awakened. He does not know what is coming. He has simply set down the struggle. He has simply chosen to sit. He has simply remembered that the small boy under the rose apple tree, all those years ago, already knew what he was seeking. And he has come to a tree of his own to let the same quiet knowing rise in him again. In the Buddhist tradition, this is sometimes pointed at as the most important step on any path. The step of sitting down, the step of stopping, the step of being willing, finally, to allow what has always been there to show itself. The rest will come on its own. Let us pause here for a few breaths. The body can rest. The mind can grow still. There is no tree you need to find tonight. The tree you are already sitting under is the one. When you are ready, we will continue together. Long ago in northern India, a man sat beneath a wide tree on a quiet night. He had walked many roads to get there. He had spent 6 years searching for something he could not quite name. He had tried everything the ancient world knew. And now, on this evening, he had stopped searching, and he had sat down on a small handful of dried grass, and he had made a quiet vow to his own heart. He would not get up again until he understood. This is the story of the long night that followed. The night came down slowly over the village near the tree. The cattle in the fields had lowered themselves to rest. The lamps in the small houses had been put out, one by one. A wide river not far away made its soft sound under the stars. The leaves of the tree moved gently in a small night breeze. The man sat very still. His back was straight against the trunk. His hands rested in his lap. His breath was slow and even. The sun had set hours ago. The stars were bright over the kingdom in the foothills of the mountains. He was alone with the tree and with his own quiet mind and with the long night ahead. The crickets were beginning their night song. Somewhere a dog barked once and then was quiet. The smoke from the evening fires of the village rose in slow lines toward the stars. The world settled into its night rhythm. The man under the tree settled with it. In Buddhist tradition, this night is one of the most important in human history. It is sometimes called the Night of Awakening. It is sometimes simply called the Long Night. The man who sat down at sunset would not be the same man who stood up in the morning. But during the hours of darkness, he was simply a tired seeker under a tree, watching his breath, letting his mind grow still. The Buddhist tradition speaks of 3 watches of that night. 3 deep movements of his quiet mind, each one carrying him further into what he had been searching for. In the first watch, his mind moved gently backward through his own life. He saw himself as he had been earlier that day, sitting by the river before the walk. The years among the ascetics, very thin, very tired, trying to find freedom through hardness. The years with the teachers in the forest, listening, learning, leaving. The road from the palace, his hair just cut, the dark hills ahead of him. The palace itself, his small son in his arms, his wife in the lamplight. He saw himself farther back. He saw himself as a young man learning to ride a horse, as a boy learning the old poems, as a small boy under a wide tree on a festival day, as an infant in his mother's arms. In Buddhist tradition, it is said that he saw farther back than that. Through many lifetimes, he saw the long chain of being he had been part of, all the small lives that had risen and fallen, all the loves and losses and forgettings that had brought him to this tree, on this night, under these stars. When the first watch ended, he was very quiet inside. He understood that he was not new. He was part of something very old. And the something very old was not a problem to solve. It was simply the long current of being alive. In the second watch of the night, his mind moved outward, beyond himself. He saw, in some quiet inner way, the long pattern of all beings. How lives rise and fall. How people are born and grow and love and lose and grow tired and come home and are born again. The seasons of being alive. How grasping causes pain and how letting go opens peace. The same truth playing out in millions of small lives, like a single melody played in many instruments at once. The Buddhist tradition says this seeing was not bitter. It was tender. He saw the suffering of beings, and he also saw the way out. The path was already in every life, waiting to be noticed. Everyone had the same heart inside them that he had inside himself. The same grasping, the same possibility of release. He saw the small child afraid in the dark. He saw the old man tired in his chair, the merchant counting his coins late into the evening, afraid he did not have enough, the mother holding her sick child, the king on his throne afraid of losing it, the beggar at the temple gate hoping for bread. All of them clear, all of them held with great kindness. He saw that they were all, in some way, himself. And he was, in some way, all of them. When the second watch ended, his heart had grown very wide. In the third and deepest watch of the night, his mind settled into the four truths themselves. He saw the first truth clearly. Life carries difficulty within it. This is part of being alive. The body ages. Things change. We lose what we love. We sometimes do not get what we want. None of this is a flaw in the world. It is the texture of the world. He saw the second truth clearly. The grasping turns ordinary difficulty into long suffering. The hand that refuses to open is what hurts. The wishing it had been otherwise. The carrying of what should have been set down. The argument with what is already happening. He saw the third truth clearly. The grasping can be released. The hand can open. Freedom is possible. It is not somewhere far. It is here. It is now. It is what shines through when the gripping softens. He saw the fourth truth clearly. There is a gentle path of cultivation, walked one breath at a time, that leads from suffering to freedom. The middle way. Neither the indulgence of the palace, nor the harshness of the ascetic, but something in between. Something tuned like the string of a lute, neither too tight nor too loose. The four truths settled in him. They were not new. He had known them, in some quiet way, his whole life. They had been the seed under the rose apple tree. They had been the question on the carriage rides through the city. They had been the ache behind all his searching. But now, on this night under this tree, he saw them in their fullness. He saw them not as ideas, but as the texture of being itself. It is said in Buddhist tradition that during this long night, doubts came to him. The Buddhist tradition sometimes paints these doubts as a great king of illusion called Mara, with his armies and his clever questions. But the truth is gentler than that. The doubts came as they come to anyone sitting in deep stillness. They were small old voices inside the seeker himself. The doubts said, "Who are you to find this?" They said, "Many great teachers have tried and failed." They said, "Get up now, give up, go home." They said, "You are not enough." The seeker did not argue with the doubts. He did not push them away. He simply let them be there in the night air, as one might let small wind chimes ring in the dark, without believing any of them. When at last the doubts had spoken their fill and had grown quiet, he did a small thing. He let his right hand fall from his lap. He let his fingertips touch the earth beside him. This gesture has been preserved in Buddhist tradition for over 2,000 years. Countless statues of the Buddha show him in this exact pose, sitting cross-legged, back straight, left hand resting open in his lap, right hand lowered, fingers touching the earth. It is called the earth-touching gesture. In the moment under the tree, it meant something quiet and profound. It meant, the earth itself is my witness. I am rooted in what is. I do not need the approval of voices in the air. I am here. The ground is here. The truth I have seen this night is real. The earth received his touch without comment. The earth had been there all along. When his fingers touched the soil, the last of the doubts dissolved into the night. The night grew very still. Just before dawn, the seeker looked up at the sky through the leaves above him. The branches were dark against the lightning east, and there, low on the horizon, was the morning star. Bright, steady, holding the first edge of the day. He looked at the star. The star looked at him. In Buddhist tradition, this gaze between a person and the morning star has been carried for many centuries. Some teachers say that what awakens in such a moment is not new at all. It is simply the recognition of what has always been the case. The star is just a star. The eye that sees it is just an eye. The seeing happens on its own. There is no one in the middle claiming any of it. In that moment, the long night of his searching ended. He was awake. He had become what he had been seeking. The peace that had been under the rose apple tree was now the texture of his whole life. The four truths had been seen all the way through. The path had been understood. The seeker, the prince from the gardens, the boy under the rose apple tree, all of them were complete, and all of them were a Buddha, which is a word that means simply, one who is awake. He sat for a long time looking at the morning star. The light grew. The first birds began their morning song. Somewhere a child stirred in a house in the village. Somewhere a fire was built for the morning meal. The world continued, as the world always continues. But inside him, a chain that had been pulled tight for many lifetimes had quietly fallen open. The Buddhist tradition has preserved a few simple words that he is said to have spoken to himself in that early light. He said, in essence, I have found what I was looking for. The long chain of difficulty is understood. I will not be drawn into it again. The hand has opened. The peace is real. He smiled a small, quiet smile. He rose slowly from his place beneath the tree. He bowed once to the tree in thanks. Then he walked out into the morning of the rest of his life. In Buddhist tradition, the newly awakened Buddha did not immediately speak of what he had seen. He spent some days walking near the tree, simply being awake in the world, eating when he was hungry, drinking when he was thirsty, watching the wide river, looking at the morning sky. He was the same man he had been the day before. He looked the same. He moved the same. But underneath, something had settled that would never again be unsettled. He thought, at first, of staying alone. He thought about going into the mountains and simply living the truth in quiet. The truth he had seen was so subtle, he was not sure anyone would understand if he tried to share it. Most people, he thought, were too caught in their own grasping to hear what he had heard. But the old accounts tell us that something turned in him then. He thought of all the beings he had seen in the second watch of the night. All the small lives, with their grasping and their suffering and their possibility of release. He thought of how clearly he had seen them in the dark hours, and how clearly he had felt them as his own kin. And he thought, if even some of them can hear what I have seen, and find some ease from it, then it is worth speaking. This moment of turning toward others is sometimes pointed at in the old teachings as the second great awakening of that morning. The first was the seeing of the truths under the tree. The second was the willingness to share them. Without the second, the first would have stayed in him alone, and the long path of the Buddhist tradition would never have begun. So he decided to teach. He did not yet know where to go first. He did not yet know what to say. But he set out walking from the tree with his simple bowl and his simple robe and his quiet smile in the direction of the wider world. Along the way, he met a wandering ascetic coming the other way on the road. The ascetic stopped when he saw him. There was something different about the man walking toward him. The face was very calm. The eyes were very clear. "Friend," said the ascetic, "who is your teacher? What tradition do you follow? Your face is so peaceful. The light in your eyes is something I have not seen before." The Buddha stopped on the road. He looked at the ascetic gently. He said, "I have no teacher. I have found what I was looking for on my own. The things I have seen for myself." The wandering ascetic did not quite understand. He stood for a moment puzzled. Then he shrugged and continued on his way down the road. He had felt the peace in the man and had not known how to receive it. The Buddha watched him go. He understood, in that moment, that teaching would not be easy. Some would hear, some would not. He would have to learn how to speak in a way that opened the door, rather than closing it. The rest of his story would belong to the people he met on the road. For tonight, it is enough to sit with the newly awakened Buddha at the foot of his tree in the early morning of the first day, to feel the morning air, to watch the morning star fading into the brightening sky, to know that the long night is over and that a gentler day is beginning. The long night under the great tree is a kind of mirror. The seeker who sat down at sunset was not different in any outward way from the Buddha who stood up at dawn. The change that happened was inward and quiet and complete. It was not a change of becoming someone new. It was a remembering of who he had always been. The small boy under the rose apple tree. The quiet witness behind everything. This is what awakening means in the Buddhist tradition. Not the arrival of something new. The remembering of something that was here all along. Let us pause here for a few breaths. The body can rest. The mind can grow as still as the morning sky. There is no awakening you need to reach tonight. The peace you are looking for is already nearer than your own breath. When you are ready, we will continue together. In the years after his awakening, the Buddha walked the roads of his country for 45 more years. He met farmers and kings, merchants and beggars, mothers and elders, all kinds of people, in all kinds of villages, on all kinds of days. To each of them, he taught the same simple things. The truths he had seen under the great tree were not for special people. They were for anyone with a quiet hour and a willingness to listen. He taught in fields and groves, in the courtyards of kings and the doorways of small houses. He taught walking, sitting, eating, resting. He taught with a few words when a few words were enough, and with long discourses when more was needed. He met people where they were, with whatever wisdom each one could carry. For 45 years he did this. He grew old on the roads of his country. The simple bowl and simple robe he had carried since the day he left the palace were the only things he ever owned. By the end, his name was known across many kingdoms. His teachings had become a tradition, but the man himself remained, until his last day, a quiet walker on country roads, with a bowl in his hand and a steady smile. There is a scene from very late in his life that has been carried through the centuries. He was walking with a small group of students along a country road. He stopped beside a tree and asked one of them to spread a robe on the grass for him. He was tired. He was an old man now. He sat down and looked at the sky for a long time. The students sat with him in silence. He had walked many roads. He had seen many villages. None of it had taken him anywhere other than where he was. Every step had simply been a step home. This is the closing part of the long story we have been following. But the truth is, the story does not really belong to him. It belongs to anyone willing to listen. The Buddha himself said this many times. He said, "Do not believe a teaching because it is old. Do not believe it because I said it. Test it in your own life. See if it brings more peace. See if it lightens the load. If it does, then keep it. If it does not, then set it aside." The four truths he taught are not Buddhist in any narrow sense. They are observations about being alive that anyone can verify in their own experience. Life carries difficulty. Grasping makes it heavier. The grasping can soften. There is a gentle path that helps the softening happen. The story of the prince in the gardens, the years of seeking, the long night under the great tree, all of it has been pointing in one direction, very quietly. It has been pointing at your own life, at the breath you are taking right now, at the body that is resting where it is resting, at the simple, ordinary moment you are inside of, right here, tonight. There is a quiet teaching at the heart of the Buddhist tradition that is sometimes overlooked. It is the teaching of enough. When the Buddha came down from the great tree, he did not become a great king. He did not gather wealth. He did not build palaces. He kept the same simple bowl and the same simple robe he had carried for 6 years. He walked from village to village, eating what people offered him, sleeping under trees, owning very little. He had discovered that very little was enough. He had spent his early years inside a palace where everything was provided. He had spent his middle years among ascetics who denied themselves almost everything. Both extremes had taught him the same thing in the end. What is truly needed is much less than the world tells us. And what is truly needed is also already here. In Buddhist tradition, the word for this is santuti. It is sometimes translated as contentment. The deeper meaning is gentler. It is the recognition that what is already here is enough. The breath I am taking now is enough. The cup of water I am drinking is enough. The small, kind word from the person beside me is enough. The simple meal at the end of a long day is enough. This is not a teaching of giving up. The Buddha did not ask his followers to want nothing. He asked them only to notice, sometimes, that what they already have is more than they often see. The Buddhist tradition is gentle about this. It does not say, you must give up everything. It says, notice. Just notice. How much is already here? How much your eyes have been seeing without acknowledging it? How much your body has been carrying you through all these years without complaint? The small kindnesses that are always passing between people, even on hard days. The teaching of enough is the teaching of noticing what was already true. There is a verse from the Dhammapada, one of the oldest collections of the Buddha's sayings, that captures this beautifully. It says, "Contentment is the greatest wealth." He did not mean that we should not try to make our lives better. He did not mean that we should ignore real hardships or fail to care for those who depend on us. He meant something subtler. He meant, do not let the mind always want more. Let it sometimes notice what it already has. Let it sometimes rest where it is. Let it sometimes say, quietly and without strain, this is enough. The contented mind, the Buddha said, is the richest mind in the world. A king who is always wanting more is poorer than a beggar who has found peace with what is in his bowl. A house full of riches with a restless heart inside it is poorer than a small hut where someone has learned how to be still. This is one of the most generous teachings the Buddhist tradition offers. It says that the deepest wealth is available to anyone, at any time, in any circumstance. It does not require waiting for things to change. It requires only the willingness to see, in this very moment, what is already true. In the Zen tradition, there is a saying that touches the same truth from a different angle. It says, "Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself." The saying is gentle and a little playful, but beneath it is something deep. It is saying that the deepest things in life do not need to be forced. They unfold on their own when we stop interfering. The grass grows, the seasons turn, the breath rises and falls. The mind grows quiet in its own time when we are willing to let it. Most of our days, we are not willing to let it. We are busy making things happen. We are pushing the river. We are firing second arrows at ourselves long after the first one has landed. We are tightening the strings of our lives until they almost break. But every so often, in a quiet moment, we remember. We let the busy effort drop. We let the doing rest. The grass grows. The light changes in the room. The breath, soft and steady, comes and goes on its own. And we taste, for a few quiet breaths, what the small boy under the rose apple tree tasted, what the Buddha tasted under the great tree, what every awake being throughout the centuries has tasted. The simple peace of being alive, exactly here, exactly now. There is a story in the Buddhist tradition about a young farmer who came to the Buddha one day with a question. The farmer had walked a long way to find him. He had heard the teachings spoken in his village by a wandering monk. The teachings had moved him, but he was worried. He said, "Teacher, I am not a monk. I cannot leave my fields and my family to follow you. I am only a farmer. I have a wife. I have 2 small children. I have animals that need tending. I have a season that does not wait for me. Can someone like me find what you have found? Or is this path only for those who can give up their lives?" The Buddha smiled. He looked at the farmer with great kindness. He said, "Friend, you have everything you need. The path is not somewhere else. The path is the very life you are already living, walked with a little more attention." He went on, "Bring kind attention to your fields. Notice the soil and the seed and the rain and the small green shoots when they come. Bring kindness to your wife. Listen to her at the end of the day when she is tired. Bring patience to your children. Speak to them gently, even when they are difficult. Bring care to your animals. They are alive, as you are alive. Notice the sky in the morning. Notice the stars at night. Eat your simple meals slowly. Sleep with a quiet heart." He paused. Then he said softly, "These are the practices. They do not look like much, but they are the same as anything I do in robes. The path is not separate from your life. It is woven through it." The farmer bowed deeply. He went back to his village. He spent the rest of his days as a farmer. He raised his children. He kept his fields. He lived a long, quiet life and grew old in his own home, surrounded by people who loved him. In Buddhist tradition, it is sometimes said that he became, in his own way, as awake as the Buddha himself. His neighbors did not always understand him. They saw that he worked his fields with great care. They saw that he was patient with his animals. They saw that he was gentle with his wife and his children. They saw that he sometimes paused in the middle of the day to watch the sky for a long time. They thought he was a kind man, an unusually kind man. They did not know that he had once asked the Buddha for instructions and had been told that the path was already woven through his life. They did not know that he had been walking it, in his own quiet way, ever since. The story is told to point at something simple. The path does not require leaving your life. It does not belong to monks in robes or hermits in mountain huts. It belongs to anyone willing to walk with a little more attention where they are already walking. The path that the Buddha taught is not built of grand actions. It is built of small returns. A small return to the breath when the mind has run far, to the body when the head has been turning all day, to kindness when impatience has been rising, to this moment when the future has been pulling, to enough when the wanting has begun pressing on the chest. Each of these small returns is the whole path in miniature. There is no return that is too small to count. There is no moment that is wasted. Even noticing that you have been carried far away from yourself and that you have only just remembered is the same wisdom the Buddha taught beneath his tree. It is the same wisdom the small boy knew under the rose apple. It is the same wisdom that has lived in human hearts for as long as there have been quiet evenings under wide skies. The path is one of these small returns, and then another, all through the day, all through the years. In Buddhist tradition, the path is sometimes described as a long walk home. The walking is not strenuous. The destination is not far. The home is the simple presence of this moment, which we have always lived inside and have somehow forgotten. Each small return is a step home. Each kindness is a step home. Each willingness to set down what we are carrying is a step home. This is the path the Buddha walked for 45 years after his awakening. It is the path his students walked for 2,500 years after he was gone. It is the path that is open, right now, to you. The breath you are taking is a step. The body resting where it is resting is a step. The simple willingness to be here, with what is here, is a step. This is the closing of our long story tonight. The four truths have been told. The Buddha's life has been traced from the gardens of his childhood to the morning star above the great tree. The teachings have been pointed at, gently, many times. What remains is for you to live your life. Not differently, not better, just with a little more attention. A little more willingness to set down what you were never meant to carry. A little more remembering of the small boy under the rose apple tree, who already knew, without trying, what every seeker has been seeking. The peace under the tree is not far away. It is here. It is in the breath you are taking. It is in the body that is resting. It is in the mind that is, for these few hours of the night, growing quiet. You are exactly where you need to be. The path is exactly where you are standing. There is nowhere else you need to get to. There is nothing else you need to do. This moment, quietly received, is enough. The grass grows by itself. The seasons turn. The breath comes and goes. And somewhere, beneath all the noise of the world, the truths the Buddha saw under his great tree are still alive, still being seen, still inviting any one of us, in any quiet hour, to come home. Let us pause here for a few last breaths. The body can rest deeply now. The mind can grow as still as the morning sky. There is nowhere further to go. There is nothing further to do. You are home. When you are ready, we will continue together for a few last words before we close. We have come to the end of our long journey tonight. We have walked through the 4 noble truths the Buddha taught under his great tree 2,500 years ago. We have followed the story of the prince in the gardens, through the messengers on the road, through the years of searching, through the long still night under the wide tree, and home again to this very moment. If you have been listening this whole way, thank you for staying with us. If you have drifted in and out of sleep along the way, that is also good. The teachings will continue to settle in their own time. Nothing more is needed from you tonight. The 4 truths are now in your possession. Difficulty is part of life. Grasping makes it heavier. The grasping can soften. There is a gentle path that helps the softening happen. These have been the teachings of the Buddhist tradition for many centuries. They are now your teachings too. Carry them lightly. Carry them with both hands open. May whatever you have heard tonight bring a little more peace to your days. May the small returns to the breath, to kindness, to this moment, become familiar to you over time. May you remember, when you are tired, that the path is already where you are standing. May the small boy under the rose apple tree, who already knew, be a quiet companion to you. And may you rest now, as deeply as you need to rest. Sleep well,